All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. We're happy to have you join us today for the first day in our series. Here, it's our grant writing series here, presented to you by the 21st CCLC National Technical Assistance Center, NTAC. And this series will, take a deep dive into, helping prospective grantees develop high-quality proposals that can lead to high-quality programs from the start. And it's beneficial to those who are new to the grant writing process, but also those who would like to strengthen their applications as well. And so we're happy you're with us, and we look forward to sharing with you as we look at the critical components of a successful grant proposal. So before we get into the core content, just want to also share with you, and you can take a look, that today we'll be looking specifically at developing a comprehensive needs assessment. And then we'll also ask you to join us on October 9th and 16th for the second and third part in this series. My name is Andrew Francis, and I'm a technical assistance liaison with the NTAC. I've been working with 21st century programs now for over 5 years, providing technical assistance support, but also providing evaluation coaching support as well. So happy to bring some of that experience as we talk about data and needs today. Before that, I've also worked in out of school time as a site director and spent a number of years in education and youth development as well. I'm joined by my colleague Shaz, and I'm going to give Shaz an opportunity to also share a little bit about himself.
Hello, everyone. I'm Chaz Sumners. I'm also a TA liaison here with our NTAC team. And I spent 11 years in the classroom teaching special ed and English. And during that same time, I was also working in out-of-school time programs. And I had the opportunity to work my way all the way from like frontline staff through site coordinator to program director. So I'm familiar with a lot of the struggles in sort of each aspect of programming. And so I'm excited to talk to you guys about grants and making sure that your prospective applications are the best that they can be.
Awesome. Thank you, Shaz, and it's good to be with you. I think probably this is our first webinar together, so great stuff. Now, I just want to remind you of the vision of the and mission of the NTAC. Of course, the NTAC is designed to provide professional support and to support SCA coordinators and professionals to obtain the knowledge and skills to implement programs that engage and empower students and their families to build lasting success as lifelong learners. And we do that through our mission, which is to provide you with best practices, evidence-based resources, and also professional learning approaches like this one to build your capacity as a stakeholder in this particular system, and to support as you work to support underserved youth and their families. More specifically, I want to share with you the several NTAC priorities that we're focusing on. And these are essentially, as you can see, that transcends recovery from the pandemic, ensuring that you as a key stakeholder in this process, you have the resources to provide access to services, high quality and equitable services, as you support students' social and emotional needs, supporting their academic needs as well, but also zoning in on some of the specific priority areas, sub areas that are listed here. In terms of also how you offer high quality STEM activities, re-engaging disengaged youth, financial literacy, and a host of other areas. And all in all, our work is to build capacity. And so we hope that as we go through today that we recognize that we're prioritizing you and we're placing an emphasis on you in that entire process. And so also we love to hear your response and your feedback so that, we can also gauge our examples of resources and experiences as well to, meet your immediate demands. So today specifically, we'll be working towards these three objectives. One, we'll look at how to design a needs assessment. We'll explore the levels of data that should be included in that needs assessment, and also talk about how to use that data in a grant proposal. Again, for those of us who may have joined us a little late, this may be very useful for those who are new to the grant writing process. but also those who are thinking about writing a grant. But even if you are a seasoned professional implementing your grant, you recognize how important the needs assessment is as well to your implementation of your approved grant. So when you go about designing a successful program, it's very essential for us to focus on not only on the needs of our students, but also on the needs of families. After all, students exist within families that are also within schools and within our communities, right? And so strong family engagement plays a very, very vital role in creating an environment that's supportive, and we're, as a community learning center, we are working towards creating an environment where students can thrive both academically and emotionally, but also recognizing that our families are key stakeholders in any program. We also want to zone in on addressing their needs, because as we address their needs, we are essentially creating a network of support where families can play a role in reinforcing the learning. We can focus on positive development, and we can also build long-term success for our students, right? Now, as such, as you are working your programs, the aim should be to also meet families where they are by offering resources and opportunities that empower them to be active participants in their children's education. And so that may include looking at what may be their communication needs, what channels do they best feel that they'd like to, for you to keep in touch with them through. It may include offering family workshops. It may include creating spaces for families to come together and to connect in your program, and also for them to collaborate with educators, both within your program, but also making those connections within the school day as well. That also includes addressing their needs in terms of if there may be language barriers that they may face. There may be issues with transportation. They may have time constraints because of job demands, or just, they may also have childcare needs as well. And so as we build a program that's flexible and that's inclusive, we want to bear all of that in mind. Ultimately, our goal is to address the academic and the social and emotional needs of our students, but also being very practical in addressing what may be some of the emotional and cultural needs of families as well. Thereby, we are taking this holistic approach to, to offer programming and activities that will lead to the outcomes that we have designed for our students. And so that's how we kind of get to prioritizing, our work. So one thing that we want to start doing with you in the session today is for you to think about your ideal program. And I'm going to toss this Padlet here. And I'd like for you to, as Shaz puts the link in the chat, I'd like for you to click the plus sign right here on the Padlet and post your ideas. As many ideas as you can post in a couple minutes. Don't hold back. What does your ideal program look like? And that could be program activities, it could be resources, it could be goals that that give an impression that your program is ideal for students and for families. Anything that comes to your mind when you imagine having the perfect program, go ahead and place those ideas on the Padlet for us, and let's talk about that together.
Already getting stuff coming in. I love that. You want to make sure we're a safe space. I love that. First and foremost, right? We want to make sure that an out of school program is a safe space, because we can't do anything else if nobody feels safe in our program.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then with creating a sense of safety, that guarantees, engagement for students, but also for families, and also ensuring that we are being interactive. We're seeing less paper and pencil people are sharing. I like this one, how it pulls it all together. Engaged kids, engaged families, happy, fulfilled teachers, communication. And of course, money makes the world turn. So somebody says a lot of money to help with the needs of the community for a long time. I'm sure
Yeah.
people could share with us, Charles, just the overwhelming needs that they have and how additional resources will also be helpful. Anything else that's jumping out at you, Charles, that you want to share?
I really love the meaningful learning activities, making sure that the education opportunities that are being provided in your programs, are rich and they are informed by not just your program design, but also by your students' voice and choice, making them really meaningful and impactful.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. So as folks are sharing, Shaz, I'd also want to ask us now to take the activity to another level by asking that we go back to the ideas that we've posted here and just take a moment to reflect on each of those ideas and use an additional comment now to share with us, either whether this idea that you posted is a want or is it a need. And just to distinguish, wants are things that would be very nice for you to have in your program, but they may not necessarily be directly aligned, or they may not necessarily address your students' specific needs, right? While a need, on the other hand, would be essential. It would be directly connected to addressing your target students' learning needs. So I'm gonna pop that link. I mean that visual again, and we'd like for you to go back and add a comment, to each of the ideas that you posted there. Let us know. Is it a want? It is something that would be nice to have, but it is not directly addressing student-specific needs, right? Or is it a need, right? That's essential, directly connected to addressing your target students' learning needs. Let's see where you're thinking. I see some people probably started to add some comment there already.
Mm-hmm. Yep, people are already jumping back in. That's awesome.
While that's happening, Shaz, just want to highlight some more mention of ideal program that's safe and enjoyable before school program, after school program, includes academic tutoring, homework help, family involvement, not a family to-do list. Real involvement really engages family, and we get it all around. Families don't want to be involved in just a box being checked. You know what I'm saying? They want to be at the
Yeah,
heart of what's happening. That's how we really get the kind of support and build a network for implementation with them as a key stakeholder.
absolutely. That's also how we grow our community, right? I mean, involved families mean that they bring in more people. They can also help us connect to other, community resources. There are a number of benefits for having truly involved families and not just, having them be like a little checkbox item.
So I do see in the chat that one of our participants has shared that need would be money, safety, a lot of kids and great staff, right? Definitely we've got to get those attendance numbers up, and we've got to have the high quality staff to plan and implement high quality activities, but also engage students and to build strong relationships with them. In terms of want, over the top prizes and incentives to give the kids on a daily basis. Again,
Mhm.
a need for funding and food. Again, money coming up very often here, but also good staff again to help with the real needs of our kids, and also true engagement for students and their families. Thank you so much for sharing those thoughts. And as you think and as you reflect on the ideas that you have shared, I'd like some people to share with us in the comment, right? How did you determine that these ideas meet the needs of your target students, right? Do you have any evidence or insight that help you to make that decision? I'd like for you to just put that in the chat. What inspired, what influenced your decision as to, hey, this is definitely a need. This would definitely be beneficial for my target students. And this is driven by this particular piece of evidence or this particular insight. So of course, critical to program success. Absolutely. I like what I'm also seeing here, Shaz, about stakeholder feedback, and that includes admin, staff, students, and families. And somebody saying, hey, I have the numbers that 100% of my students and families are eligible for free and reduced lunch, right? Teacher buy-in. We have formal surveys at the end of the year. And that's
Love those
exactly where we're
surveys.
going. A wellness survey, absolutely, that we have at the school we work with, and the data shows their needs because it uses their voice. And there's just one thing that we want to talk about and drill down with you. And I love the excitement. I also love the contribution in the chat that's really enriching the conversation today. That as we involve students, in our program over time, they will show better growth as we use the data that's available to drive our intervention and our support. And we want to look at some of these aspects throughout today's session. So thank you for your feedback and your contribution so far. Now, as we talk about conducting our needs assessment and that being a critical part of writing a proposal to operate your 21st century program, I would like us to look at it as not just being a one and done, right? Needs will shift over time as students and families enter your program. You may have schools that may enact new programs and priorities. You may have the circumstances in your community may change as well. And by virtue of that, we want to use this continuous improvement cycle to help us to make adjustments, essentially to our program using the data, using those key insights. And so the first thing we want to do is to, as part of that cycle, is to identify local needs, right? That, of course, involves conducting a needs assessment, but you also need to examine just relevant data that helps you to understand what are the most pressing needs for students and families that my program is serving, right? But also, what are the root causes of that? So not just looking on the surface, some of the symptoms of what may be happening, but looking at some of the root causes of those needs and drilling down to design activities and program services that respond to those. Now, as you identify those local needs to your needs assessment, the next step is to then select relevant and evidence-based interventions, right? It's determining, will this intervention work? What evidence is there that supports that that if we take these steps, if we implement these particular key activities, we will see the results that we desire for those that we are serving. And so that will require that you conduct, rigorous research to look at what's available, to determine, is it relevant? Is it evidence-based? Is it necessary? But also, is this sufficient to produce the kind of results that I'm looking for, to improve the outcomes of students? And there are a couple of those that are available. There's What Works Clearinghouse. I know a couple of states also have over time developed their own kind of a collection of evidence-based interventions that you can refer to. So go ahead, research those and use them to determine what interventions will you be selecting to meet the needs that you've identified through your needs assessment. Then the next step after that is to plan for implementation, and that may include training your staff, a crucial part, so they become well-informed and prepared implementers, right, in the process. It may include securing your space for programming. It may include securing your resources and materials. But that may also include you developing activity SMART goals, right? You may already have SMART goals, or if you are in a prospective grantee, writing your grant proposal, you want to be able to design activities that have a goal in mind, and you can show that direct link between this activity that you're implementing and how it addresses the needs that you identify through your needs assessment, right? And that of course is a part of what we call the intentional activity design process, so that you are intentionally making those linkages between needs, your overall program goals, but also the activity goals as well. So everything feeds up essentially from the ground level up to help you to realize those strategic and high level goals for your program. Now, from there, you can also implement with fidelity, means that you are faithfully implementing as per your program design, essentially. Based on how you've designed the program, you implement it accordingly, but you're also monitoring the activity to ensure that it's been implemented as intended. And where monitoring data shows that you may be off here or there in terms of the frequency, the duration, or the intensity of those activities, you can then make shifts as well to ensure that you're on track based on the program design. And that also includes wrapping up that process. It's a cycle, but at some point, continuing to examine and to reflect on just observing, assessing the activities to determine whether you're accomplishing the intended goal. And if not, either you're going to get rid of the activity. It's not working. It's not moving the needle at all for your students. Or does your data, does your interview, does information from your stakeholders indicate that probably if you made this tweak or that tweak, so it's more relevant to your context and to your community, then that would also produce some kind of change for you. And that's important that you, as you're, applying to expand your program offerings, or as you are reapplying for a grant, that you bear this cycle in mind, and that it drives the process of your grant writing. So you're very much grounded in taking these steps in addressing the needs within that proposal or that program plan. And so to gain further insight into that process, we have to reflect on our own previous experiences with conducting the assessment. I'm sure to some extent we have done that, right? And this kind of gives an impression as to why is it that we conduct the needs assessment. One, we want to gather information on the gap between what is and what is that we want. And as part of that, we're getting an impression as to what is the lay of the land, what are the needs, where do the gaps exist, and how do we plug those gaps. It helps us to also improve the performance of our targeted stakeholders, right? So we're looking to move that needle, and that's why the assessment would also help you to develop a set of performance measures, or to adapt those measures if those are being provided as well, whether at the federal level or even at the state level. It helps us to identify the needs of our for staff training, but also needs of our partners. And as we've been highlighting throughout the session so far, we're also able to design activities that meet those needs. Any other goals or purposes that you have found, that a needs assessment helps you with accomplishing, that you want to share in the chat? I'd love to invite you to do that now as we keep the conversation going. Go ahead and put that in. As we continue to explore the fact that it's an essential part of this process, right? Because as we complete this assessment, the key goal should be for us to identify those needs, but be responsive to those by coming up with strategies that will also help us to not only design the program for the duration of your grant funding, because it also helps us with sustaining our program, right? And so a key goal of the assessment is also to include strategies that will support the program beyond its initial funding period. And that's important because often we think about that at the latter part of the program, or we may just not explore that as much in the grant writing phase of the process. And so let's also use this data to drive that. Shaz, any thoughts on that as well, in terms of any other goals or purposes for needs assessment?
Absolutely. I love that last point you made, where you want to start this planning while you're writing your grant, right? Even like you're a prospective grantee, and you want to make sure that you're planning from the beginning to be successful and to be sustainable long term, right? So these are things that we want to look at while we're prospective grantees. We want to really take the time, drill down, and then work out a plan, not just for what's going to happen when the wheels hit the ground, but what's going to happen significantly after that. It's going to happen when the next plane is ready to take off, that kind of thing.
Absolutely. So the big question is, when do we conduct a needs assessment, right? And again, we have a lot of folks in the room. Let's share. One, definitely, while this process is important, once a program is awarded, it's also important that we start thinking about the process earlier on, even as a prospective grantee. I'm sure we may have a couple of those on our session today, right? Because as we understand the needs of our students and families, that's so, as was just mentioned in the chat, we're able to design programs that can effectively address the needs of students and families, right? And so a well-crafted needs assessment will help to shape your proposal, because you'll be able to reflect on those priorities. Now, you can also think about how you will use the needs assessment to guide program implementation as well, if you are awarded, right? And so taking that systematic approach to examine your performance gaps and identifying areas for improvement, that can also help you to tailor your program to meet the needs of your stakeholders. And so typically, we find that our needs assessment will be conducted before the program is launched. So, as part of the grant writing process, you would have documented that. But I also like to say to folks that sometimes you write the grant, based on general data that may be available, for that school or for that community or for that set of students. But sometimes you get a set of students in the program that you may need to also look at before you launch that program. Just get additional data on those specific students as well, and that forms a part of your needs assessment. Now, as you're implementing, probably you start in program implementation for the school year, and you probably have gone for that period. Just before also or before summer programming, you want to also do some sort of a needs assessment as well to see, how have things changed? How have students progressed? And as such, how do we incorporate those data points in our summer program as well? So we're keeping our fingers on the pulse, not just using data from 10 months or so ago, but also we are continuing to use that improvement cycle to figure out those needs, how those are changing, and how we can use that to inform our program activities. Now, you should also consider doing that prior to renewal application, right? That's also a key point for conducting needs assessment, but also regularly throughout the program year. So while it may not be an immediate step for prospective grantees, it's critical for us to consider, how responsive we are to the demands of our funding arrangements, and as such, keeping that assessment cycle as being continuous will definitely help us. Now, just want to share that for prospective grantees, you can also include the steps that we shared, in as part of your grant narrative. Essentially, how you are going to be, sustaining the process throughout. Showing the reviewers that, hey, I'm not just going to be doing this needs assessment at the start after just to get this grant, but we're going to find ways at these four points in time that I mentioned before to also continue to assess needs and to use that to guide program implementation. So what that does is that it helps you to keep in mind adjustments in community needs since the grant was first written, but this can also help you to establish the baseline for students as well, so that you can then look at those starting points as you're implementing your program activities and look at areas for improvement as well. Now, conducting a needs assessment requires that there be an effective process as well, right? So in addition to applying the continuous improvement process, right, think about how you are constructing the needs assessment itself, right? As you construct that needs assessment process, you want to keep in mind that it's important to focus on obtaining the results that are informative and actionable. So being very targeted as to what results do we really need. And that's going to be driven by what's in an RFP or a no-go, or whatever your state may use, right, to request that there be programs that are submitted for approval, right? But also looking at how you can use that to implement your program. Also focus on how this will help you with decision making, right? We're talking about using data to drive the decision making process in the program design, in developing your goals, in developing activities, in selecting curricula, in selecting evidence-based interventions, all of that, right? And in doing that, you're also thinking about the priorities and the goals of every stakeholder. So what do students, maybe we talked about wants and needs before. What are the priorities for students based on what the data is showing us? What's the priority for school administrators, for families, but also for other community partners as well, who have a stake and an interest in school and in education for students within a particular geographic area. But also take some time to review your the school or sponsoring organization strategic plan. They also have goals there that they're trying to achieve. and you want to use that to drive your needs assessment process, so that all of those priorities are included, but also you can contribute, you can feed into the achievement of those high level strategic plans that have been established by the school or by your sponsoring or organization. Now, with that process in mind, let's talk a little bit about the types of data. Right. So the main types of data that we can use to better understand the needs of our students and families, and also our communities, right? Today we'll just explore two types, quantitative data and qualitative data, and why each of those is essential. So our quantitative data are really measurable and expressed in numbers. So we're talking about our test scores, our attendance rates. We're talking about demographic statistics about, for example, race, ethnicity. We're talking about in terms of gender. We're talking about, as I mentioned before, free and reduced meals, that sort of a thing, getting an impression of the socioeconomic conditions for students and families, right? Now, we use quantitative data to identify patterns, to be able to track progress over time. Again, going back to what I mentioned about having those baseline data established, so you can track progress within, whether it's month upon month, or by quarter, or also across a program year or a school year. And then you're able to make objective comparisons as well. What this allows us to do is that we're able to pinpoint gaps in performance, and to also highlight any areas that may need attention based on the measurable indicators, right? So very big on establishing those quantitative indicators that we can track over time, see the progress that's being made, and highlight any areas that need attention as we're seeing those trends. The next type of data would be our qualitative data, which really gives us insights into the experiences and the perceptions, right? How do students feel about the program? How do family members feel about the program? How do the members of the community feel about the program and its activities, its offerings, right? And what this data does is that as we collect this data through interviews and focus groups, or even through surveys, it gives us a deeper understanding of the underlying reasons behind the numbers, right? We're able to capture that human element that we may have missed if we only use quantitative data alone. So when we bring the quantitative and the qualitative data together, it gives us this comprehensive needs assessment that ensures that your program is really designed to not only look at the measurable needs, but also the nuanced needs of those you are serving, because we're looking at the hard data, that quantitatively, but also looking at how those who are being served, what are their perceptions of what the needs may be, and what activities, what interventions, what approaches, what strategies could be used, but also their own impressions of other parameters of how the program could operate as you look into developing your operational plan for the program, if you are a new or prospective grantee as well. Let's talk a little bit more about the quantitative data, right? Because this consists of values that can be expressed in numbers, as I said, in terms of our assessment scores or attendance rates or benchmarks, going back to what has been largely promoted as the GEPAs, the outcomes for your program, right? And what this data does, it provides a very clear but also measurable answer about how many students are doing this, how many students are performing at a particular level on their state assessments, how many students are flagged for chronic absenteeism, is that they're attending school for less than 90% of the days or so, right? It also helps us to determine how often as well something may be happening. And so what the quantitative data allows us to do is to also rank or to compare variables. And it gives us, as you can see here, this visual representation, right? Whether through graphs or through tables. and it makes it very easy for us to identify patterns and trends. And so you want to include this in your needs assessment, so that you're able to clearly spot and see those patterns, those trends, and identify those points of intervention where you need to invest your support or put particular attention or activities. Now, for prospective grantees, using quantitative data is critical when you're designing your grant proposal, because it helps you to identify, which schools you should focus on as you look at the data that's available within a particular, area, a city or so, or where your organization may be located. What student groups you probably need to target more based on what the data is showing, as you're able to break down even, say, test scores or graduation rates by by race or ethnicity, or even looking at what's happening at the different levels of the system, whether at the elementary, middle, or high school, right? Looking at student attendance, looking at graduation rates, looking more so at where students may be higher at risk. And so as you use that data, it helps you to establish very clear performance targets in your proposal, in terms of how you can probably support improvements in school safety, or increasing college and career readiness as you look at graduation rates, or generally enhancing social and emotional outcomes as well for students. And I do note, the contribution that's been made in the chat, that it should be a continuous process, and that's what we're saying. We definitely agree with you, and that it will also help you to create a program that will support the success of your grant request. Absolutely. But I like this particular comment, that as you look at your state dashboard, or your school district databases that may be available as well, it's an excellent way to identify and to collect this data. In terms of, as I think about it, the percent of students who may be deemed proficient or below on state assessments, that's data that's readily available for you. Looking at your GPA data, or number of students who may be cited for disciplinary referrals, right? Or number of students who may be eligible for free and reduced meals. Look at the absenteeism rate, or the chronic absenteeism rate, or looking at probably the percent of students who may be seeking mental health services, or you also, teacher reports of students exhibiting signs of for mental health support. All of those are data that you can include. And the idea is to, as was shared in the chat, use available tools and resources, like your statewide academic assessments, using surveys with rating scales or reports, or on community safety and well-being, to get this data and to pull it together, and to be able to demonstrate, your design of a well-rounded program that resonates with the needs of your community, and ensuring that you have solid data and evidence to back up the proposals that you're making to provide services. As some of you have started to share, I'd like for anybody else to share with us, are there any other examples of quantitative data that you have been using, or you have considered collecting to use, as part of your needs assessment? Go ahead and share with us some of those examples of quantitative data. We know we have state data dashboards to get state academic data. Census data, yes, absolutely. Looking at crime statistics, or looking at other employment rates within your local area. I-ready assessment scores, definitely, to get some benchmark data, community demographics, and progress monitoring data from counselors in our schools, yes. Using census data in your evaluation report, awesome. And how can you also incorporate the evaluation report findings in your needs assessment as well? I like that. Also using your school report cards. All of those are key options as you look at using quantitative data to support your argument, your program design, to offer high quality support services and activities for students and families. Now let's look at the quantitative data. And so unlike qualitative data, I beg your pardon, unlike quantitative data, your qualitative data cannot be expressed numerically. What it does is that it offers you valuable contextual insights into the experiences and also the perspectives of students. So you may consider doing a student survey or a family interest survey, right? And so what this data tells you is the why and how, right? As it provides you with a deeper understanding of the underlying factors that may be influencing student, family, and community needs, right? Digging deeper, explaining why is it that we're seeing this kind of performance on student assessment scores? Why is it we're seeing these numbers of disciplinary referrals, right? Students and families and teachers as well, and other stakeholders, counselors can give us that context. Now, for your grant proposals, your qualitative data can be especially powerful in capturing the voices, the stories, right? Of your key stakeholders. Listening to those stories so you can change that narrative, and you can in turn also, tell your story of success in the end, having implemented your program. And so, for example, as you talk to families, whether through surveys, interviews or focus groups, or you're able to gain insight into family backgrounds, into challenges that students may be facing. It could be also teacher observations, you understand, and doing teacher interviews or teacher surveys. All of those are examples of tools and approaches that you can use to capture the human experience, right? And that, of course, allows you to collect, rich, detailed feedback that describes the realities of your stakeholders. As you're designing your grant proposal, you definitely want to highlight community specific needs, right? And also look at social and emotional learning challenges, if they're if there are safety concerns, and that can come from your census reports or other reports from law enforcement as well. And that really provides a compelling narrative that will complement your quantitative data. So as you bring both approaches together, as you use interviews and focus groups, it gives you insights into how you will address these needs in a very meaningful way, and it also shows that you have a comprehensive understanding of your community and the community needs, and how you plan to serve those needs, right? And that whatever you're doing has been driven by not just the hard data, but also by the perceptions, the feelings, the insights, the experiences of those who are within that space, and what they perceive as what would be some of their, some of the key things that would make an impact for them. Now, also, we have to think about the levels of data as well. And at NTAC, we talk about pulling your qualitative and quantitative data from these three areas, whether school and community level data, your student level data, but also your student and family voice data. Right now, when we talk about data in these three areas, we're really focusing on at the school and family level data on attendance. We're looking at the number of English language learners that you may have, or how many students are deemed as having a special need status. Or you're also looking at your reading, your math, your science assessments, right? And as you are pinpointing that data, it gives you that high level view of the community needs. When we dig deeper into our student and family data, we are looking at specific academic standards or skills that students may be experiencing gaps or challenges with, and how you can address those. Of course, you can also use various one of the approaches we mentioned before to collect that data. While the student and family voice data helps you to identify what students want to learn. What are they interested in? And like I always like to say that the student and family voice data is like your bridge to address the needs that are identified at the school and student level. Because students tell you how they'd like to learn, but also what activities they'd like for you to share. And so from these three sets, from these three levels, we're able to also, gain information on what maybe the strengths of our families, the strengths of students, and how can we leverage that strength within our program as well. Because they bring something to the table that can also be used to accomplish your program goals. And I do see somebody sharing with us the Pennsylvania Youth Survey as one of those key tools that they can use to get this kind of data. That's important. Whatever resources your state may have available, use those, to get the data that you need to design your program, or also to implement a high quality program as well. So when we talk about the school level data, that gives us the big picture, we're looking at reviewing the data that's assigned, that's available to help you to essentially establish that high level need, right? It's that broad range data, looking at community level, that helicopter view of what's happening, looking at trends at the school level, and also looking at essentially what should you target the most, based on what seems to be most pressing for your community. Again, your state assessment scores will fall in that category. Your attendance data will fall in this category. Behavior data, as I mentioned before, so this is disciplinary data that's available. In-school suspension, out-of-school suspension, referrals to a dean or so. School safety data will also fall in the category, and any data on social emotional learning or mental health. So if the school probably is implementing a SEL survey, or they may be doing observation or using other ways of collecting this data, that's going to be crucial for you to be able to determine what those needs are for students. Now, we're going to do an activity, right, using our Padlet again. And I'd like for you to think about the school level data that will be necessary for your needs assessment. And as you think about that, we are going to be asking you to tell us what data or what questions do you have, based on what we're sharing here for you on the Padlet. So we have here we have 4 scenarios. And so all the people who your name starts with A to F, we'd like for you to go and make a list of data that you plan to request and record for this particular scenario 1. If your first name starts with G to L, then take a stab at scenario 2. If your first name starts with M to R, go ahead and share with us a list of data for scenario 3. And if your first name starts with the letters S to Z, go ahead and share with us the list of data you'd like to collect in relation to this particular data that we have for you here. So that's the first tier scenario, school level data. 40% of 4th grade students met standards on the state matters assessment. What other data would you request in relation to that to help you in developing your needs assessment, right? And then the second one for those who are G to L, M to R for those scenario 3, and for scenario 4, S to Z. Any thoughts on Shaz, your C? Sorry, let me go back.
I am C. Yeah. So, yeah, actually, I mean, I'm looking at as some of the like answers start to come in. Uh, when we see that 40% of our 4th grade students met standards on state math assessments, it oh, I'm sorry, Don. No, I thought I put the link in the chat. Here, I'll put it back in there. There we go. Yeah, so it's a different Padlet than the one we were using the first time. Yeah, I would wonder, what did we do? Like, what interventions were already implemented by our math teachers, leading up to this data assessment? What supports have been put in place, right? as I see other answers coming in, I see attendance for students, right? So the students that are scoring that low, what are their attendance rates? Like, is there a correlation between those things? I love that too. Um, and then what specific standards aren't met so that we can, really drill down and look for where specifically students need support. Some good stuff coming in.
Yep. And as as folks are sharing that, I see, report cards, grades, iReady assessment scores, tutoring data from our program, mental health needs as well. Also, so we see here large people are zoning on state standards as well, right? What standards were not met, right? What strategies did we already use in relation to that piece of data as well? But also we see a combination here of people not only want to look at their academic data as well, but also they're saying let's look to see if attendance but also any other data sets could be useful in helping us to establish the needs. That's for scenario one. For scenario two, we see what sections are on the assessment, right? Scenario four, census data of socioeconomic status of students in the school to determine risk factors related to why there may be more behavior challenges, and that's related to the scenario about 20% of elementary students received 3 or more disciplinary referrals this year. Proficiency rates in math and ELA to determine frustration levels of students. So looking there at how the intersect between academics and behavior as well, to provide support. Going back to scenario two, which 70% of fourth grade students met standards on state assessment, state language arts assessment. We see here about the pass rates of passing. So what were the proficiency rates before? But drilling down into disaggregated data from formative assessments like the NWEA map assessment, right? And also
Love
some of the
that, Jill.
assessments like state tests as well. Very interesting
I love
perspectives. Go ahead,
I love
Shad.
that idea about like drilling down into this disaggregated data because especially if you have all this data from the formative assessments already, you have a trail of data that,
Mm-hmm.
a number of data points that you can take into consideration to figure out sort of take a holistic approach to figure out what is going on, with our fourth grade students that aren't meeting the state language arts assessments. It's
Awesome.
I think it's easy to underestimate the amount of data that's available to us.
Mm-hmm.
And I also love just how wide a range these four scenarios give you of like the different data that can be used. We have hard data like our school assess like our state assessments. We also have disciplinary data, which helps us really inform um, you know our programming in ways that we might not be looking at otherwise.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. So I'm going to I'm going to throw to you now, Shaz, for you to continue to talk about the next two data types and kind of the conversation about, who needs what data and how do we do that? How do we collect that and include it in our needs assessment? You're muted, Shaz.
Apologize. So yeah, we're going to talk about community level data, right? So community level data is also an essential part of a needs assessment. It's important for prospective applicants to understand what needs and resources their potential programs have available for them. The list of community assets that your program can draw from is very wide, right? But some examples of types of community assets are, individuals, just certain people in your community that have skills or maybe just areas of expertise that they can contribute to your program planning, or maybe they can help mobilize or attain resources to meet program goals. Moving forward, you have businesses too, right? Businesses help you in some of the same ways individuals do, but at a larger scale. They're local. They can be You have for-profit businesses that can share skills, but more importantly, materials and funds with your 21st CCLC programs, right? Large employers often have funds or departments that are devoted to giving back to your local community. So it's a huge resource that you can be taking advantage of when you're looking at different partners community partners to involve as stakeholders when you're doing your grant plan. We also have larger organizations. These can be other nonprofits, as well as local associations or partnerships, community organizations that can help you either directly, or they can be a valuable networking resource, right? Like they can connect you with other local partners with whom you can improve your programming. And also just resources, right? Physical, instructional, membership, technological resources that might be available to you either through your partnered educational institution, or just they might be free resources. It could be a local park that's close to where you're holding your out of school time program. So it's really important to think about and envision the different types of assets that you have. And we at the NTAC team, actually, we have a great community asset mapping tool that is available to you to use to sort of like, envision those kinds of things. So let's look at what like a sort of loose community asset map could look like, right? So we have our individuals, our organizations, our resources, and I'd like us to just sort of in the chat box do a quick brainstorm about what community assets exist in one of these in one of these sections, or don't exist in your particular community, right? And so go ahead and drop a resource or an asset, and then label it as either individual, organization, business, or resources. It's just a good way to start thinking about it and looking at what other people might have. Oh, volunteers from local colleges. That's an incredibly powerful resource. United Way. Again, these large organizations that have these pools of resources that we can draw on. The YMCA. Yep. It's where I cut my teeth in OST time programming. I know how useful they can be. Yep. People who have gone through your program. It's another excellent way that you can tap into individuals in your community that are particularly drawn to help, right? Because they know the impact that your community has. Local foundations, yeah, community foundations, family shelters. Yes, that is great, and I think an understated resource. Our local chamber of commerce. That's awesome, man. You guys have a very firm handle on some of your local resources. That's awesome. And I mean, the other side of that is also looking at what might not be available in our particular community, but we can also then look at ways that we can supplement those resources with the ones that are available. Thank you guys so much for sharing. All right, so let's move on to the characteristics of a successful partnership, right? Like once you identify these community assets, what does a successful partnership look like when you're paired with these assets? So one key aspect of high quality grant applications is making sure that you have effective partnerships, right? And you want to keep in mind what it's going to actually take for those effective partnerships to be, well, one, effective, and two, successful in the long term. You're definitely going to make sure that there are shared goals, vision, and passion, right? Most importantly, for our partnerships to be really strategic, they have to be mutually beneficial. It can't just be something where we're only gaining a benefit or they're gaining a benefit. And so that means that you don't just share the vision of how your program is going to go, but you share what your goals are for your program. And you want to make sure that you're able to convey the passion that you have for serving students and families, and you want to partner with organizations that have that same passion. You want to make sure that you have a well-developed plan of action. So before you start any of your collaboration with your partners, you want to make sure that you have a clear plan for all their responsibilities, procedures, and oversight. Planning ahead really helps you prevent challenges later on during implementation because of some sort of miscommunication. You also want to make sure that there's a sense of shared ownership, right? Your partners will be the most successful if they feel like the success of their programs, of your program, or the activities that they're involved in depend on their participation in leadership. We couldn't have done this without you. So thank you so much for your continued involvement with the program. And then, of course, that feeds into clear communication, right? Being able to go to these partners and clearly communicate what you need from your partners, what your expectations are, and your solutions to challenges, but also to communicate, how thankful you are for their involvement at all in your programming, and just how impactful it is for youth that they are involved in your program. So let's look at a excellent way to make sure that we're all on the same page when it comes to a plan of action when we're establishing our partnerships. When you're ready to establish a partnership, the best approach is to create a memorandum of understanding, or MOU. Right? So an MOU is a document where you lay out the goals and responsibilities and the expectations of your partnership. So if you've never created an MOU, NTAC has a handy guide for creating one and some examples of really high quality MOUs, and a template that you can use when you're filling out an MOU. You're looking to create one of your own. And we're dropping those in the chat right now for you, so that you can take a look and you can use them to inform your grant writing process. There they are. Awesome. So keep in mind that your partnerships are never going to be perfect, right? And that's why it's important that you plan for these challenges ahead of time. Whenever whenever two people are interacting, coexisting, and working together, there are going to be, hiccups, right? And so eliminating as many of those challenges from the outset with a very clear memorandum of understanding is an excellent way to prevent conflict and to resolve conflicts moving forward. If you discuss your problems early, you can prevent them from mushrooming into some sort of giant, massive problem, right? Communication is key in everything, but particularly when it comes to establishing strong and impactful partnerships. So let's look at student level data, right? Student level data provides us sort of detailed insights into why individual students might be struggling. And it helps us identify learning gaps and behavior challenges and areas of need. The data that you get at the student level is critical for informing the types of interventions and supports that you propose in your grant application, because those are going to look different depending on what your needs are. And while a lot of this data does come from the school, such as things like academic assessments or behavior reports and progress tracking from digital platforms, it's also really important to consider additional sources, right? We don't want to just be looking at academic sources for all of this data across the board. But for example, juvenile crime data or mental health indicators can be really valuable in determining specific interventions for our at-risk students, especially in programs that are serving vulnerable populations. Partnering with your school day staff, as well as local agencies and community organizations, can help you really gather and analyze this data so that you target students for enrollment who are going to benefit the most from your program's interventions. Some key sources of student level data include academic performance, that we were talking about, attendance, behavior, social emotional well-being, as well as external factors like juvenile justice involvement, like I just mentioned. And while it might be a little more challenging to collect this data for a new program, collaboration with your school partners and your community organizations will be essential for identifying the students you plan to serve and tailoring your program to meet their specific needs. So what student level data do we want, right? It's really difficult because there are a lot of different meetings you're going to end up at. There are a lot of different people you're going to end up talking to. So what data do we actually want to examine, right? So let's do a little activity to help us with that, right? So imagine, and I know it's not hard to imagine, but imagine you're busy, right? You wish you had more time to meet with your school day staff, but you only have time to attend one meeting. So here in the Padlet that we were just working in, we're going to go back to it and we're going to go to that meeting, right? And we're going to get some notes. So in the second row on the Padlet, we're going to have notes that you got from your specific meetings. We're going to break down the groups in the same way we did before, A through F, G through L, M through R, and S through Z. And we're going to look at the notes that we got from our meetings, and then we're going to record questions that we have underneath those notes. Like, so after we went to this meeting, what questions are we left with after having this data shared with us? Let's go ahead and take a look at our Padlet and see what kind of student level data we get from our meetings. So right here, I know, I mean, I'm a C again, so I'm starting off with a meeting with our math specialist, the fourth grade team, and they're their 21st CCLC representative. So that's awesome. Looks like a review of state math assessment showed that 40% of our fourth grade students met standards. And it looks like some of the key challenges are frequent errors in multiplication and division and struggling with the concept of area. So one of the first questions I would have is, what have we done so far to support students who have shown that they're struggling, up to this point before we got to our state assessment? What kind of scaffolding might be in place? What kind of supports might be involved? Maybe some previewing, some pre-teaching material, stuff like that. That would be a question that I'd have. What do you think, Andrew?
So I'm looking at probably considering, as you said, what does the data tell us from internal school data around? For example, my area is scenario one. So looking at the key challenges, frequent errors in multiplication and division, and a struggle with concept of area. So looking at, what do we have in terms of benchmark data, essentially? What is that? What is that showing us? And then looking at, steps that, as you said, that we'd have taken in terms of the pre-teaching and stuff to be able to look at any steps that we can zone in on some more, essentially, to address those for our students. And
I
I
love this,
see,
Deanna.
yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, yeah, what school resources are available and how can our after school program support those students? That's a great question. And honestly, previewing is a really great strategy to do that in out of school
Mhm.
time. You work with your school time personnel and you say, okay, well, what are you starting to cover, moving forward? Like upcoming, what do you have? And they let you know. And so you can sort of infuse those concepts into the stuff that you're doing in your out of school time program. So you give students a little sneak peek of these
Mhm.
topics. Oh, Sandra, look at this. I love this. All right. So we've got for scenario 4 here, we have you're meeting with the dean of discipline, right? And he's been seeing an increase in behavioral referrals this year. 22% of elementary students receive 3 or more discipline referrals. So what's occurring in the classroom? What results in these increased behaviors? Increased pressure to improve test scores. Students don't see the relevance of the work. Students who need support, additional support, receive this during recess and specials. So we have Sandra saying, do you have a social emotional curriculum to help students with coping skills and identifying and communicating needs? That's a great question, and you'd be surprised how often the answer is no, Sandra. Do students have voice and choice during their school day? Incredibly important. All right, just making sure that we inform our programming by what our students need and want. And can we fill some of those gaps out during school time? I would imagine, as long as you have good collaboration with your school day partners, that the answer is yes. All right. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much for attending these meetings. I know you're all busy folks. So when we look at the data, right, we want to look at what it tells you and where you get that student level data from. Who did you ask? When did you receive it? Is it timely data? Stuff like that. Just things to keep in mind when you're looking at student level data, because it can change so quickly. So let's take a look at student, family, and voice data, building off of Sandra's last suggestion there. So student, family, and voice data provides valuable insights into what they want and need from the program, which is most important, right? That's who we're serving. We're serving students and their families. We can get this data from things like surveys, focus groups, idea boards, and even social media, really. Social media platforms are, I think, an underrated tool for capturing real-time feedback and also just gauging interests, right? And understanding how the community is feeling, right? The sentiment of the community. At its core, student voice and choice data helps you understand why students and families will come to your program and what they're hoping to gain out of it. While school and student level data is essential, it's equally important to focus on student voice data to ensure that your program resonates with who it serves. This information shapes program spaces that are not only relevant, right, but also inviting. Creating a environment that's informed by student and family voice, looking through that lens when you're designing activities lets you truly engage your participants and meet their actual needs instead of the perceived needs that you might have for them. And again, you want to look at sort of community asset mapping tools when you're looking at connecting all of these things and supporting what your students' voice and your student and family data provides to you. Because oftentimes it feels like, well, they're asking for all of these things, but they're not necessarily things that we can directly provide. But that's where your community partners come in. That's why they can be such powerful assets to your program. So let's do another little activity here. So in this activity, we've received our student family and voice data. So we're going to review it and we're going to record in the Padlet what we feel like it's telling us and what questions you might still have. So right now we're looking at that third row of the Padlet there. And we're taking a dive into our family and student voice data. So I'll take a little poke at mine in this first scenario here. So we have the elementary students' interest survey shows that Lucas wants to learn about earning money, magic, and sports math. And activities that Lucas wants to do include cooking, experiments, and movies. Oh, Deanna beat me to it. So Deanna says the data is telling me how we can incorporate these activities into our program if they're not already in place. The data also tells me that Lucas may not know about the activities and events that we already have in place. This is why community outreach and tabling at events is so important. That's right. You want to make sure that you're communicating with your families all the opportunities that are available in your programs, because if not, you could be putting on the best programs in the world, and if nobody knows about them, then they don't understand that their needs are being served. That is a huge point. So let's look at I guess Andrew, do you want to look at
No,
scenario number 2 here?
sure. Before that, Chaz, I'd add that, for example, for scenario 1, we could ask Lucas what are some of the things that he is interested in cooking. That may be based on his cultural background or so, right? But also for experiments, just to get things that he may be interested in, but also types of movies. That would also help us to be able to, identify relevant academic content that could be incorporated as we are selecting the type of movies that are appropriate, of course, that we could use, to build some skills there, but also as we are also looking at experiments as well. And just to find out why is it that he wants to do those activities, right? Why does he want to learn about earning money, magic, etc.? So that we can tailor that, but also balancing that with other students as well that are in the program. For scenario 2, I'd say, pretty much questions around, thinking about, any particular, well, obviously he likes science and wants to be an EMT, right? But also making connections with what he may be doing at school already. But in particular, though he may like science, how is he doing where science is concerned? His perceptions of his own competence where science is concerned, and using that, to guide also selecting, whether he'd be interested in doing probably doing an interview or having a chat with somebody who's in the field as we see there. But also as Jill is adding, that we need to examine the curriculum of our required college and career readiness program as well, to ensure that it's responsive. And a big question is, as you're saying that, do we have a college and career readiness program? Because many
Yeah.
programs do not have that. That may be a bigger need that needs to be captured as well, designing one or adopting one, but looking also at what is offered during the school day. That's important as you go about doing that. Or what may be within your community so that you can make those connections and not reinvent the wheel, but leverage those existing resources, existing curricula, existing personnel who could, essentially offer those activities as well, for my league to benefit from.
Love it. It's amazing. And it's incredible just how like little snippets of data like this can inform larger programming decisions, right? So right here with like what Jill's saying, like this could expose the fact that we don't really have a college and career readiness program, and it could be a real need for our program. So it helps us inform and develop content in such a way that our programming is responsive and reactive to the needs of our community, right? Which is really what we should be doing. That's why we're here, to meet the needs of the community. Okay, so let's take a look at bringing all of this together. We talked about a lot of stuff, right? And we've gone through over a lot of data. But if you've collected the right data, you should be able to identify the key needs for your community. And that allows you to write a needs assessment, which can guide your program goals and activities and illustrates your full understanding of student and family needs. So let's take a look at some examples here. So school level data, we have what are the overall trends, what's needed for long-term improvement, and over 60% of third grade students achieved scores below proficient on the state mathematics assessment. Well, that's some interesting data. So how can we form a needs assessment based on this type of data? Well, let's take a look at what some of that might, at what that might actually look like. So let's take a look at what our guiding question here on the next slide looks like. So on the next slide here, we see that we've developed a guiding question about what specific skills students need to master to meet standards on the state assessments, improve report card grades, and ensure promotions to the next grade. So when we look at the needs assessment statement, teachers have indicated 40% of students have failed to meet academic standards. Most often, they struggled with mastering fractions and measurement. Additionally, behavior data reveals that students with challenges in these areas often exhibit increased frustration and disengagement in class. So a lot of really valuable information. And the question is, how do we use it to inform what we're going to be doing in our program, right? How do we use it to inform the goals that we have for our program? So we want to look at what activities students say they want, what activities can you accommodate during your program, right? And you want to look at, and you want to think about the student survey data that is, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize. And then we also have student survey data here that's indicated that 80% of students would like more opportunities for hands-on activities, such as creating a micro business startup or escape room design or coding and game design, right? So we have our guiding question and we have some detailed data that we can then use to inform our program. I would not have been able to guess that our students would want to create a micro business startup, but through the survey that we put out, we see that they do. We can, I mean, maybe we could even combine them. I love the idea of having a little micro business startup for escape rooms, right? You have, you can have maybe like night where families come in and everybody pays some sort of nominal thing to be able to engage with these fun escape rooms that their students have put together. So we're creating a program or an event based on the data that we're collecting, and we're infusing it with the needs and the wants of our students, right? While also making sure that it's academically relevant and impactful. So these are just great ways to use this data to create needs assessments. So let's wrap it up by going back to our Padlet one more time to create our own needs assessments. So you're going to use the data that you collected throughout the session to write 2 needs assessments on your Padlet. So that would be the data in the previous rows that you've worked in your Padlet with already. And we're going to come up with 2 need statements on your Padlet. If you come up with more than 2, please feel free to keep writing. But we'll just cap it at 2. If you're having trouble coming up with some fun ideas and some impactful need statements. So let's take a look at scenario number 1 here. So the first part of scenario number 1 said 40% of 4th grade students met the standards on the state math assessment. And then we met with the math specialist, and they told us that the key challenges were frequent errors in multiplication and division, and a struggle with the concept of area. And then we looked at the student interest survey, right? And we found out that Lucas wants to earn money or learn about earning money, magic, sports math, and he's interested in cooking, experiments, and movies. So how can we use all of this to develop something that's impactful when it comes to need statements? Andrew, any ideas?
Yep. So definitely one of the things that we want to do is that the statement needs to capture what we're seeing at the different levels, Shaz, but also in terms of the school or community level, the student level, and also the family voice level as well. That's important that we're able to do that. But also, as you walk through the examples for us earlier on, right? Perhaps we definitely would also want to incorporate, a statement that captures what we're seeing as well from teachers, right? So what are teachers indicating? So obviously we see that 40% of them met the standards, means that we have 60% who are not. So we could begin the statement by capturing that, right? But also incorporating more specific notes from our meetings as to what the specific difficult areas are. So we could say 60% of students who fail to meet academic standards, are in on the statement assessment. They struggled with or made frequent errors in multiplication and division, right? Or they also struggle with the area with the concept of area, actually. But also adding to what others are saying, in terms of some, I saw, for example, something that I'm borrowing from scenario 4, around the fact that, for that example, somebody shared that it's possible that student may have been disconnected with the ELA delivering instructor. That's particularly for that one. But it could be that, students, we could ask, teachers for scenario 1 to share with us, what specific difficulties do the 4th grade students typically face when they're learning subtraction as well. You understand? But also looking at anything else in terms of misconceptions or general challenges that could help us to frame the need some more in a statement that then informs the development of a specific program goal. Those are my thoughts. Let me see if anybody
Absolutely.
has put anything up that we can also process a little bit. So there we have one
Oh, here
chat.
we go.
We
Yeah, I
go
see this
ahead.
here. We got a review of state assessment data revealed that 60% of fourth grade students failed to meet standards in math. Areas that students struggle with the most include multiplication, division, and concept of area. That's right. I mean, listen, that is a very good and concise needs statement, right?
Mhm.
We're taking we're taking sort of a holistic approach for all of the data that we're bringing in, and we're looking at, okay, well, this is specifically what this data is telling us our program needs to do, our program needs to support. Love
Mhm.
that. And then, I mean, of course, you use that to inform your programming. Or how do you support that in after school program? Oh, we do a awesome cooking club now where we work with a lot of conversions that deal with fractions and decimals, right? But I mean, we do it in the scope of, okay, well, we need this percent of this, like we're scaling down a recipe or something like that in our cooking club. Ways that we like use the needs assessment to inform the programming that we are putting in. And then it's all, we're also looking at what the student voice and choice is as well, so that it's actually impactful and engaging. And for scenario 4 here, just as a refresher, we have 22% of elementary students received 3 or more disciplinary referrals this year. And then we met with the dean of discipline, and there's been a 22% elementary increase in elementary students who have received 3 or more discipline referrals. We have increased pressure to improve test scores. We have students don't see the relevance of their work. We have students who need additional support and they receive it during their recess and during their specials, which are things that they really like and are engaged with, right? And then we have a caregiver scenario or a caregiver survey that tells us that Sebastian gets very angry when he doesn't understand what's going on. School's very hard for him, particularly ELA. He doesn't like his reading teacher, but he does like his math teacher. So we have all of these elements, right? And we're putting them together into need statements. And Sandra here has elementary students have increasing behavioral referrals and seem to be disconnected with the instruction and activities available in ELA and math. We believe the students need access to engaging and hands-on activities and support in ELA and math in out of school time. And we also have elementary students seem to need more social emotional support based
Mhm.
on increased behavioral referrals. We believe access to evidence based social emotional curriculum weekly in out of school time may better meet the SEL needs. Oh, and we have Sarah too. Additionally, culturally relevant and differentiate ELA math activities. This is awesome. See, and when you gather this much data and then you collect them into needs assessments, the programming almost writes itself for you. Like it's right there plainly how you can create new programming in your space that supports your students in their academic space in school, right? Working with your school day partners, looking at what struggles they might have and looking how we can support them moving forward. This is incredible. I'm so glad that these needs assessments came together so well because, again, they're such an integral part of your grant proposal process, right? You want to be able to have very firm ground to stand on. You say, this is why we are applying for a program. This is how our program is going to directly impact the needs, our specific needs in our community.
Yeah, I want to add to
Well,
that. I love the examples. That's awesome that people are taking that down, and I'm sure they're going to be great need assessment statement writers,
that's right.
whether for their new grant or for a prospective grant or those who already have a program. As they get their data, they're able to also write needs assessment statements. Even during the implementation phase of their grant.
That's right. And if you do struggle, remember we shared the template and the examples in chat for the MOUs, right? So that's also something very useful when it comes because that's one of the trickiest parts when it comes to um, you know creating when you're just starting the grant proposal process. So thank you all once again for joining us, and thank you for contributing to the very fruitful conversation that we've had here and being so interactive. If you'd like to connect with us, please feel free to visit us at 21stcclcntac.org Or you can use the QR codes on your screen to sign up for our newsletter so you can stay up to date with all the really amazing stuff that we're putting on. So, I mean, for example, we have part two of our grant writing series a week from now, telling your OSTs or telling your story. That's going to be an awesome chance for us to really show how we can show just how impactful our program is, or will be if we're potential grantees.
Yeah, and
Also,
while folks are leaving, Charles, just want to encourage them to complete the feedback form that has been placed in the chat by our colleague Dave. We really want to hear from you so we can continue to provide high quality resources. As we look towards the second and third part of the series, we can also use your feedback to make any improvements there based on your needs. So please take a moment to complete the survey and complete the feedback form and let us know how the session went for you and your thoughts about how we can improve. Again, it's data that we can use to establish needs as well, as we do our own needs assessment. Thank you so much.
thank you all. Also, one last thing, I did share in the chat a link to our communities, our new leaders of communities of practice, which is a great space for you to share ideas with other new leaders and touch base and just see what everybody's doing. Just makes your program better by taking cues from other programs. Again, thank you all for joining us, and thank you all for being such incredible contributors to the session.